It's the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 28, looking at the groups and teams of the 2024 Copa America. This episode is looking at the players of Mexico. Here we go! Hello and welcome again to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and we continue Series 28 on the groups and players of the 2024 Copa America. This episode covers Mexico's players. It's actually part 2 of the Players Mediacast. Here we look at the selections. In part 1, we made a list of the candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad. And there is a link to that, part 1, in the show notes. This episode, part 2, will be divided into 3 sections. In section 1, we're going to take a quick look at their preliminary squad and their warm-up games. Section 2 is the main part of the media cast. We look over the list that we compiled in part 1 to see who made it and who didn't. And in section 3, we summarize surprises in the selection and review injuries. Let's begin then. In section 1, we'll take a look at how Mexico put their squad together. So we have a 31-man preliminary roster published on May 10th, and then that 31-man roster was reduced to 26 players on June 11th. So we're going to have 26 players, like most. There are, I think, 1 or 2 teams that might have 25. 5 players cut, and no late replacements for Mexico. So we're going to have basically 5 players on the preliminary squad here that didn't make the final squad. In terms of their warm-up games, we have 3 games for Mexico. The first one was against Bolivia. That was on June 1st. Then they played Uruguay on June 6th. And finally, they played Brazil on June 9th. Just a brief look over the squad. We think the first 2 are fairly experimental, while the third game against Mexico looks more like what we would expect to see as the starting lineup. Looks like their starters there, and we'll talk about that as we go through. Let's begin with let's move on to section 2 then. And we begin with the manager, and we're going to say that Jaime Lozano, I'm not really sure how to pronounce his first name, so Mexicans might be laughing at me. Anyway, I'm going to go with Lozano. Was selected for the squad effectively. He will lead them through the cup. Let's go on to goalkeepers, and we're going to see surprises here, maybe introduced by the fact that Guillermo Ochoa, our first definite candidate, was not selected for the squad. Actually, for him and for other players that we strongly expected to see, we don't think it's a matter of non-selection. We think they declined to play. We might be wrong with that, but we mentioned it in part 1 where they played in the 2022 World Cup. They used their A team in the 2023 Gold Cup, and they have the 2025 Gold Cup next summer. So that would mean they play 3 tournaments for 3 summers in a row. And we think that some of the top players declined. Ochoa, one of them. Anyway, for whatever it is, Guillermo Ochoa, our definite candidate, not selected. Bit of an odd situation with Luis Malagón. When the preliminary roster came out, and even on the document later on after that, Luis Malagón is one of the selected goalkeepers. By the time the final squad is published, he's not there, and goalkeeper Acevedo, who we'll meet soon, is on the squad. So we're not sure if that was a mistake or whether he declined or what happened. But anyway, we're going to say Luis Malagon was not selected even for the preliminary squad there. So both of our definite candidates not selected, nor was our likely candidate Jose Antonio Rodriguez. So yikes, what is going on here? Well, what's going on is that we have three new candidates, and those were the three selected. So even our three seems to be off the squad or retired players. One retired player were not brought in. Instead, these three players were selected. So I'm going to tell you about them. The first one is Julio Gonzalez. He's 33 years old, but he got his first appearance in October 2023 and started two games prior to the tournament. He was on the bench for 7 and not selected for one other. And I have an ugly confession to make here, is that we did not finish processing the new players on the squad. So kind of a mistake for part one. There are some of the players here we didn't mention. Having said that, none of them really showed up on the field to alert us to the fact that we had missed this. So we're introducing them as new players here. Some of them are new. Almost all of them didn't play any games until the warm-up games. And so there we have it. And some of them are actually new to the squad, as we'll see. So Julio Gonzalez has been around since October 2023. His 2 caps were in the warm-up games, though. He plays for UNAM Pumas in Mexico, and he had played for a small club in Spain, Praviano, in 2019. Julio Gonzalez, then a new candidate. Raul Rangel is also a new candidate. He's younger at 24 years old, and he got his first appearance in June of 2024 in the warm-up games. He started one of their games there and was on the bench for one of the others. And he plays for Guadalajara in Mexico, but he's on loan. No, he is. That loan is finished, so we'll just stick with Guadalajara for Raul Rangel. The other one is Carlos Acevedo. He's in a different color here because of that strange situation with him not being named on the preliminary squad and suddenly popping up on the final squad instead of Malagon. But he is in fact selected, Carlos Acevedo, and he's 28 years old, 6 caps for Mexico since 2021. And he had actually been selected for the final squad for the 2023 Gold Cup, Acevedo, but he was injured before the tournament and replaced. Over this period, he started 2 of their 25 games since the 2022 World Cup. He was on the bench for 3, and then he had been off the team for the last 20 matches up until March 2024. But he has made the squad here. So big surprises in the goalkeeper area. Let's see if we can determine which of them is going to start. We have Gonzalez starting game 1 and game 3, and Rangel starting game 2. So given that we think the game 3 looks like the starting squad, we kind of think it would be Julio Gonzalez. Of course, in part 1, we were quite confident it would be Guillermo Ochoa. But given the changes here, we think Julio Gonzalez has a slight edge over Rangel there. Okay, well, we'll have some situations like that, but the goalkeeper was the most severe, with all of our definite and likely candidates not playing in the tournament. Let's move on to defenders and central defenders. So we had a definite candidate in Johan Vasquez and a likely candidate in Cesar Montes. Both of those were selected for the squad. No candidates at the possible level, so we go down to possible but unlikely, and we do have one of these players selected, Israel Reyes, but Gilberto Sepulveda not selected. If we go down the list even further to the players seemingly off the squad, we have Victor Guzman, who was selected for the preliminary squad, but was one of the 5 players cut. We also have a new candidate here, Jesus Orozco, and we'll talk a bit more about him because he was selected for the squad. Orozco is 22 years old with 3 caps and no goals for Mexico since 2023, and he plays for Guadalajara in Mexico since 2020, and got his first appearance in September 2023, so should have been on our list. He started 2 of their remaining 12 games prior to the tournament. That's up until March 2024. He subbed in for 1 and was on the bench for 4 and not selected for 5 others. So again, didn't really appear on our radar in terms of well, maybe he should have in terms of even starting games because he started 2. Anyway, here he is, Jesus Orozco, and he is selected for the squad. Let's look at the warm-up games, and here we actually have, well, I should say it's a 4-2-3-1 formation in the first 2 games, and a 4-3-3 formation in the last game. In both cases, it's 2 central defenders, and we have basically 2 different players playing in each one. I won't go through them all because a couple are players who seemed to be under consideration and weren't ultimately selected for the squad. For example, Guzman was in games 2 alongside Orozco. Guzman was not selected. In the final game, though, it is the players we would expect, or at least Johan Vasquez. And I'm not surprised to see the other was Edson Alvarez. He's a defensive midfielder who we'll meet soon. But in the past, he played as a central defender. We've even seen him there recently. So he was the one in the second game. So that may indicate they'll use him in the final game. Oh, sorry, in that starting lineup, rather than Cesar Montes, who we expected to see here. So one or the other, I would say. On we go to left backs, and Jesus Gallardo is not selected. Good heavens, he's always there. He is not selected, so again, we think probably took the tournament off, took the summer off. They deserve some time off. Jesus Gallardo, not selected. We go down to our possible candidate, Gerardo Arteaga, and he was selected for the squad. And one of our 2 possible but unlikely neither of our 2 possible but unlikely was selected. So Jesus Alberto Angulo and Omar Campos not selected. However, we do have a new candidate to add to the list, and that's Brian Gonzalez. Brian Gonzalez is 30 years old, but just 1 cap for Mexico in 2023, from 2023. That was his first appearance in December of 2023. We have a lot of these players playing this friendly in December 2023. That didn't seem like an important game because it was all players, kind of unfamiliar players. But we do actually have a few players emerging from that game, and Brian Gonzalez is one of them. So after that December 2023 friendly, he didn't start any of their remaining 6 games, but he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for the last game in March. And then not selected for 4 of the matches. So Brian Gonzalez, well, a surprise to me anyway, selected for the squad. So that leaves us with Gerardo Arteaga and Brian Gonzalez. Let's see who started in the cup. In the first game, we have Jorge Rodriguez. Actually, that was an unfamiliar name to me and was one of the players who were kind of tried out. He was first appearance was in this game in June, and then he wasn't selected for the squad. So I'll confess there may be a couple of players like that who didn't actually make it onto my radar. And I looked him up, but I'm not going to look them all up because there are several of them. Anyway, Jorge Rodriguez wasn't selected. It's the more familiar Arteaga in the second and in the third warm-up game. So as we might guess, Arteaga seems to be the starter in the absence of Jesus Gallardo, and probably Brian Gonzalez the backup, we would think. Okay, let's move on to the right back position. And here our likely candidate Jorge Sanchez was selected, and the other likely candidate Julian Araujo not selected for the squad, nor was the possible but unlikely Kevin Alvarez. He had been an injury doubt. We'll remind you of that at the end. We knew about it in part one. So we have a new candidate here too, also called Brian, and it's Brian Garcia here. So Brian Garcia is 26 years old with 2 caps for the national team since 2023 and plays for Toluca in Mexico since 2023. One of those players tried out in that December 2023 friendly, and from there he started 2 of their remaining 6 games prior to the tournament, on the bench for 1 and not selected for 3. So Brian Garcia selected for the squad here, and probably the backup to Jorge Sanchez. I think when we looked at starters, we thought Jesus Gallardo would definitely be a starter. Jorge Sanchez we thought would likely be a starter, but we saw a bit of a challenge there from other players playing in the position. Now, though, I would say Jorge Sanchez looks to be the player. In the warm-up games, another unfamiliar name started game 1, Monroy. He didn't make it to the squad, though. In the second game, it was Brian Garcia. And in the third game, it was Israel Reyes. So that actually kind of proves the doubt we had that Jorge Sanchez would be a starter. I still think he will be. I'm a bit surprised that he didn't start any of those games. But he is selected for the squad, Jorge Sanchez, or perhaps we will see Israel Reyes playing there out on the right. Okay, on to central midfield, and here we meet, kind of an interesting little detail here. None of the central midfielders are coded as defensive midfielders, even though some of them are quite defensive, especially Edson Alvarez. We had the opposite situation with Ecuador's team, where all of the players were coded as defensive midfielders, and there were no central midfielders, even though they were central midfielders. So oddly, no players coded as defensive midfielders for Mexico, but we have central midfielders, a definite candidate in Edson Alvarez, who was selected, and also in Luis Romo, also selected. So they're not missing all of their starters here. And that's all we had. We had 2 possible but unlikely candidates, Hector Herrera and Marcel Ruiz. Neither of those were selected. However, one of our players seemingly off the squad, Fernando Beltran, was selected, but only for the preliminary squad. Didn't make the final cut. So I think that's a bit surprising, but actually we did move some of the central midfielders to the left and right midfield position because they play a 4-3-3 quite often, so don't be too alarmed. Anyway, now we are thinking of the 1 or 2 central midfielders, and let's look at the warm-up games to see who made it. Okay, so in the first 2 warm-up games, it's a 2-man midfield. I'm not familiar with either of the players in the first game. It looks like a lot of those December 2023 players are being tried out here. In the second game, though, it's Beltran and Edson Alvarez. So seemingly off the squad, Fernando Beltrán, was tried out. I guess he didn't perform that well or didn't impress the manager enough to make the squad. Edson Alvarez, we do expect to see there. However, we saw that he played central defense in the third game, and it was Luis Romo in the center of their familiar 4-3-3 formation in the third game. So we'll look at the left and right midfielders right away here. In fact, we're moving on to left midfielders. And here we have definite candidate Luis Chavez, who was named to the squad. Possible candidate Eric Aguirre was not named to the squad. And we had one player seemingly off the squad, Diego Lainez. It looked like he was selected, but like the goalkeeper, we saw the same strange situation where he was named to the preliminary squad and bang, suddenly not on the final squad. I shook my head a few times and had to look into it and found that it was just a different name there on the final squad. Jordi Cortizo, who we will meet soon, but he's not a left midfielder. Anyway, so it looks like Diego Lainez was never chosen for the squad, or perhaps Cortizo's mother snuck into the office at night and crossed out his name and put Jordi Cortizo's name on the list. Whatever it is, Diego Lainez is not on the final squad as we thought he was. Okay, so that leaves just Luis Chavez as the left midfielder in the 4-3-3, and we'll do the right midfield as well, and then look at the warm-up squads. Over on the right, we have Eric Sanchez, also coded as a central midfielder, but playing primarily the right midfielder role when they use the 4-3-3, and he was selected for the squad, so another kind of starter that is playing in the tournament. And he's the only candidate over here, so let's look at the warm-up games and see what they did. Well, in the first two warm-up games, we see the 4-2-1-3, so these players were not part of the either line of the midfield, the two-man defensive end or the three-man attacking end. But in the third game, it's a bit more familiar 4-3-3. And we see Luis Chavez starting on the right, even though he's the left midfielder, and Carlos Alberto Rodriguez starting on the left. We actually moved him from central midfielder up to attacking midfielder in part one. I won't go into the details there, but Eric Sanchez not starting any of the three games, which was a bit of a surprise. So I'm very curious to see what they do in the cup there, even which lineup they go with. So let's move on to attacking midfielders, and our candidates are a definite candidate in Orbelin Pineda, and he was selected. However, our likely candidate, Irving Lozano, was not selected for the squad or is not playing in the cup. And that's a bit of a disappointment. I was looking forward to seeing him, as Mexicans tend to be. They seem to like him a lot. However, our possible but unlikely candidate, Alexis Vega, was selected for the squad. And we also have a new candidate here in Cesar Huerta, who I'll introduce here. He's 24 years old with 8 caps and 1 goal for Mexico since 2023. So again, a player who actually was on our radar. We just didn't process those players for the mediacast by mistake. So Huerta plays for UNAM Pumas in Mexico since 2022. Guadalajara before that. A lot of these players come from Guadalajara. Huerta got his first appearance in September of 2023, and he started 3 of their remaining 13 games prior to the tournament, as well as subbing in for 5, and he was on the bench for 2 and not selected for 2. So he definitely should have alerted us to the fact that we had not processed a few players. Anyway, Cesar Huerta, one of the 3 candidates here, and we'll just look at the look over and see. So In game two, I'm going to skip game one. It actually says Alvarez as the starter there. Um, just looking, that is not Edson Alvarez. It's a different Alvarez. I'm not familiar with him. In game two, it was Huerta, our new candidate. And in game three, Quinones, who I think we're going to meet soon, but I don't have it in my head as to who he is. So I'll forge on and maybe remind you when we come across his name a bit later. So again, a bit surprising not to see Orbelin or Pineda there, but we will actually see Pineda soon. But we're going to move over to right attacking midfielders, and here we have definite candidate Uriel Antuna. Um, and he was selected for the squad. And we had not actually seen Orbelin Pineda or Irving Lozano as a starter. It was too unclear on that side. Uriel Antuna, we did see as a starter, and we can jump right to that because there were no other viable candidates over here. Pause that though. We do have a new candidate, and that is Jordi Cortizo, whose mother might have snuck into the office to put his name on the list. As I say, Jordi Cortizo was not on the preliminary list. Diego Lainez was, but then Cortizo's name replaces Lainez on the final squad. So we can assume he was selected for the preliminary squad. And that Lainez wasn't. Anyway, Jordi Cortizo is a new candidate. He's 28 years old with 4 caps for the team since 2023 for the national team. He plays for Monterrey in Mexico since 2023, and his first appearance was in September 2023. He started one of their remaining 12 games up to the tournament here, and he subbed in for 3 and was on the bench for 3. 5 matches he had not been selected for. So he is selected now for this cup and is seemingly the backup of Uriel Antuna, although we're not dead sure about that. Okay, in the first game, again, it's an unfamiliar name. The second game, it's Robert Alvarado. Roberto Alvarado, who is coded as a forward actually, and we'll come to him. We'll come to him soon. In the third game, third warm-up game, it is not. It is Uriel Antuna. So again, that third warm-up game, looking like more like the starting lineup that we expect, with a couple of exceptions there. But Uriel Antuna and Jordi Cortizo, the 2 candidates here. Okay, let's move on to our central attackers, and here is where we had placed Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, and he was selected for the final squad. He was only a possible candidate there, actually, but he was selected. Our possible but unlikely candidate, Sebastian Cordova, was not selected, but we have a new candidate here as well, and it is Marcelo Flores. So Marcelo Flores is not really new to the team. He's just 21 years old, but he's been with Mexico since 2021 with 3 caps. He was born right here in Canada, and has actually been I wouldn't say a consideration, but has been around long enough that he might have been selected for the World Cup in 2022 or the Gold Cup in 2023, but he wasn't, perhaps for the Gold Cup in 2023, because he missed a penalty at home to Suriname just 3 minutes into a 9-minute appearance before the tournament. Maybe the manager was mad about that. Anyway, Flores returned after a 2-year absence in June of 2024, so the warm-up games. Didn't start any games here, but was on the bench, Flores, and is selected for the final squad. So the position of central attacking midfielder is actually not used that much by Mexico. I think we moved Carlos Rodriguez up here because when it was used, he had played it. In this case, it was used in the first two games. An unfamiliar player played it in the first game there, but it was Orbelin Pineda, who we have as a left attacker, starting in the position in the second game. And in the third game, the position was not used in the 4-3-3. So our two candidates there. Marcelo Flores is coded as an attacking midfielder. And Carlos Alberto Rodriguez, a central midfielder, but we left him up here. Okay, let's go on to the forward line. And we did have one player coded as a secondary striker, and in part one we dealt with him there, and it's Henry Martin. We expected he would not definitely be a starter, but a likely starter, and he is not part of the squad here, so one of the big names missing. So we move on from there and look at who might be the forward. For centre forwards, we have Santiago Jimenez as a definite candidate. Raul Jimenez was a likely candidate, but he is not part of the squad either. We have Roberto Alvarado as a possible candidate. And two new candidates, that's where Julian Quinones is. That's why his name wasn't that familiar to me. And Guillermo Martinez. Let's take a quick look at them. Julian Quinones is 26 years old. He has 5 caps and 1 goal for Mexico since 2023. Interestingly, he plays for Qadsia in Kuwait since 2024. He was with Copa America and Atlas in Mexico before that. And he got his first appearance back in November 2023, starting 2 of their remaining 8 games. Subbed in for 3, on the bench for 1, and not selected for others. I don't know how these players got past me in part 1, but once again, I feel shame because we should have processed him. Anyway, Julian Quinones introduced as a new candidate here. The other is Guillermo Martinez. He's 29 years old with 3 caps and 2 goals, so off to a good start there. Since 2023, he plays for UNAM Pumas in Mexico since 2024 and Puebla before that, and got his first appearance in that December 2023 friendly, and since then started 2 of their 6 remaining games, including the warm-up game. No, I'm not dead sure. I'll come to that. Started 2 games, subbed in for 1, and not selected for 3. Guillermo Martinez. So those are our candidates. And the selections were Santiago Jimenez, Robert Alvarado, and new on the list here, Julian Quinones and Guillermo Martinez. Let's look at the warm-up games. And it's a single forward in the first game. Again, another name that I don't recognize and who didn't make the squad in the first one. But it is Martinez, Guillermo Martinez, starting in the second one. And then a 3-man forward line, actually, Quinones, the player new on the list, starting as a left attacking midfielder there. We consider it a left attacker position in a 4-3-3 formation with Santiago Jimenez in the middle. And given that Henry Martin is gone, we think Jimenez will be the most likely starter there. All right, that is it for part 3. How complex with Mexico, as it usually seems to be. Let's review some surprises, and we're going to go fast here because there's a lot to do and we're already going too long. So notable non-selections. Here they are in a bundle. Goalkeeper Guillermo Ochoa. Actually, a lot of them are goalkeepers here. Well, I'm going to put Malagon as a surprise absence too, and Jose Antonio Rodriguez, three goalkeepers, all at the likely level or higher. None of them playing in the tournament. We have left back Jesus Gallardo, also not part of this tournament. He was a definite candidate. Also, likely candidate Julian Araujo, the right back. Not selected or not part of the squad. Irving Lozano, the left attacking player, and Henry Martin, the secondary striker or forward there. Also, he was a likely candidate, and also likely was Raul Jimenez. So 7 big names missing there. Surprise inclusions are Israel Reyes, the central defender. We had thought of him as a possible but unlikely candidate, but he made it to the squad, played as a right back actually in the warm-ups. Alexis Vega, the forward, also possible but unlikely for us. Central defender Victor Guzman was seemingly off the squad in the build-up. Diego Lainez, again, strangely named to the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. Kind of disappeared from the list, so we're not sure. Anyway, he was an odd selection if he was on the list, because he was seemingly off the squad, so didn't play for the country much in the build-up. Fernando Beltrain, who only made the preliminary squad, just as Victor Guzman there, also had seemingly been off the squad. So some surprises there, but actually not as many as one might guess, with the number of big names not coming. We have a list of new players, and I'll go through them very quickly here. So goalkeepers, Julio Gonzalez, Raul Rangel, and one other, Acevedo, also a surprise. Central defender Jesus Orozco, left back Brian Gonzalez, right back Brian Garcia, left attacker Cesar Huerto, central attacking midfielder Marcelo Flores, right attacker Jordi Cortizo, who again was not on the preliminary squad but suddenly popped up on the final squad, and forward Julian Quinones and Guillermo Martinez. So all of those players new to the squad. Part of the reason for that was our mistake in not processing them. Some of them should have been on a part of our Part 1 podcast, but some of them wouldn't have been, because they just showed up for the warm-up games. So a lot of new talent being brought in here. As far as injuries go, it's not a problem for Mexico. We only really have Kevin Alvarez, who was out with an infection since mid-May, and expected back June 30th. So we kind of suspected that he might be off the list, but he was not a strong candidate anyway, and we really don't have any candidates who were injury problems. So kind of lucky for Mexico on the injury front, but we're going to see a new squad in terms of top players not being part of the squad. All right, that brings us to the end of our look at Mexico, and good luck to Mexico in the Cup. We would like to thank Paul Udin and Pixabay for the wonderful background music accompanying this media cast. The piece is called Victory Epic Music.